Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. Welcome to another continuing conversation. It gets better and better every year. We are now going into our 4th year of podcast. If you can believe it or not, I'm Michael Dismuke. I'm a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures RPG, lead writer and designer for Captain's Log, a solo RPG, in addition to being a fiction writer for Star Trek Explorer magazine. Of course, this show's not a show without my co-host, Jim Johnson.
Hey everybody, Jim Johnson. I am the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG and the Captain's Log solo RPG, published by Meticulous Entertainment, and co-host on this here show with Michael over these many years, many episodes. And we've been fortunate to have all kinds of different guests on the show come by and share their genius and their cool things. So we've got another fun show lined up for you tonight. So without more ado, I'm going to introduce our guest. And after I introduce him and he tells us a little bit about himself, I would like you to tell us what your favorite Star Trek series is and who your favorite Star Trek character is. So without more ado, our special guest, Johnny.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Johnny K, indie filmmaker, own a little production company called Chaotica Studios, and we some pretty big Star Trek fans over on our side. So we just put out a Star Trek fan film, Farragut Forward, which is doing really well on YouTube right now. My favorite Trek for all my life, I thought it was Next Generation. And then I actually got around to finishing DS9, right? All 7 seasons. And as a mid 30-year-old in my mid 30s at that time, I was shocked to find out that TNG was actually no longer my favorite Star Trek, because just the characters, those arcs, and don't get me started. That'll be a different podcast, but I love Deep Space Nine. Still got to stick with Worf. There's just so much Worf out there. I know I'm not the only person to love Worf, but that poor guy, I mean, he's just a walking tragedy. Just everything of his brother, his house, his father, his lady friends. I mean, the guy is just a walking Greek tragedy, but I love him. We got a lot of Worf, so I'm going to say Worf.
You've made Jim very happy. I'm the Voyager fan. He's the DS9 fan here. So
I appreciate Voyager, but Voyager just didn't have the ability to have the same level of supporting characters that DS9 had. And when you've got 40, 50 supporting characters and they're all written so well and so acted so well, right? And they just keep coming back and back and back. I think that Voyager was going somewhere, right? Constantly going somewhere, and they were leaving everything behind, right? Yeah. And DS9 had to stick with it, right? You have to live with what you got, and that's there's a lesson there, right? Yeah. There's a lesson in Voyager too, right? There's something to be said for picking up and going, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, and there's a lesson to say about also all of our stories that start maybe around the RPG table, or in this case, we're talking about Farragut Forward. Just, Johnny, to frame it, in case people have never heard about Chaotica Studios, what does Chaotica Studios do? And then we're going to jump into what Farragut Forward is.
Yeah, sure. Chaotica Studios is my little indie film studio that I started in late 2019. Got into filmmaking pretty late in my life. I'm still somewhat early in my life, I guess, but I didn't get into it as a teenager in my early 20s. I waited for a while, then got into filmmaking. Since then, we've put out a ton of short films, mostly because that's what our budget and time allows, is short films. If it takes 2 years to put out if it takes 2 years and $10,000 to put out an 18-minute movie, I'm not in a huge hurry to make a feature film for obvious reasons. But we put out some shorts over the years. To my surprise, our debut actually ended up I made it as a challenge to myself to see if I could do it. And it ended up going around the world. It got picked up in 50 some festivals worldwide. We took home about 14 really big wins for a debut short. Then it kind of became my crack addiction. Once you get that feeling, it's like, why am I not making a short film a year, right? I've got so many stories. We got to crank these suckers out. So since 2019, we've been cranking out a lot of those. Somewhere down the line, I got into fan films, which I never really wanted to go into, honestly, because I've got my own stories to tell. I didn't want to get kind of bogged down with the drama of working with other IPs, which can be dramatic, right? And I kind of wanted to spare myself that, do my own original stuff. But fan films kind of got offered to me. At some point, I ended up putting out a Batman fan film called The Oath, which is a prequel to Michael Keaton's 89 Batman. It takes place about a week before that. Did really well. We just hit 1 million views on YouTube a couple weeks ago. So for indie film, that was big. And then right off of that, I got picked up by John Broughton and gang. John owns Farragut Films, and they are one of the longest running Star Trek fan series, period. They go back to 2005 or 6 on YouTube, and that's about how long YouTube goes back. So basically, they are the history of YouTube. They've been putting out Star Trek fan films for almost 20 years, and that was all set in the 60s TOS era. And when they decided to go ahead and take that pre-established crew and move them into the Wrath of Khan era of Trek, they called me and said, "Hey, do you want to kind of come in and be our Nick Meyer and take us into Wrath of Khan, and let's go a little darker, a little more cinematic, and everybody's going to be wearing monster maroons, and there's going to be a lot of Klingons." And I said, I can't turn that down. So.
That's Nick Meyer. That's a huge compliment to even compare to that. That's cool.
Yeah. I worship Nick Meyer. He happens to have directed my 2 favorite Star Trek films, right? And had a lot to do with another one. But anyway, I got pulled in, worked Farragut Forward. That's been the last 2 years. The film just came out October 1st. You can find it on YouTube. It's doing really well, and we're super proud of it.
Yeah, I had a chance to watch it too. It was so fun, and I've kept up with it. One question, because people often think about it. Wait a second, how do you get to do a fan film like this? Why is CBS or Paramount not coming in and crushing you at the door? Tell people about it.
Yeah, well, there actually is a kind of a long history of how Paramount has looked at fan films, and I'll spare you all that because there's some ups and downs. That's a story of its own. Probably would be a good documentary one day, the story of Star Trek fan films. But by the time I got into it, I knew there had been a lot that had gone on. I knew that Paramount had shut down some productions for various reasons. So then, my thing was, I don't want to waste anyone's time, right? Are we going to sink 2 years of hundreds of people's lives into a project that's going to become the world's most expensive home video and live on YouTube for 5 minutes until it gets yanked down? So I was pretty diligent about doing research to see, is this going to be a time waster? Is it a non-starter? Are we going to get pulled down as soon as it gets released? The good news is Paramount CBS actually made it very easy for filmmakers. They got the lawyers together and put out a list of guidelines. And I was just as a filmmaker, I was happy they were called guidelines and not rules, right? Because those are different in the legal world, right? So we took a look at their guidelines. You can find them if you Google Star Trek fan film guidelines; they'll pop right up. They have some guidelines about fundraising. They actually limit filmmakers to 50 grand in fundraising, which you can do a lot. Indie film can do a lot with 50 grand, right? So they limit fundraising. They actually have a guideline talking about the duration. They want to keep the duration short. They don't necessarily want this to go chapter after chapter, multi-year. We took a little leeway with that because I didn't want to. 2 years ago, we had a 56-page script, and I looked at John Broughton. I said, "Do we want to arbitrarily cut our story in half to fit a guideline that may or may not be enforced, or do we just kind of want to, stick to everything else, stick to the letter of the other guidelines, cheat that one a little bit, and hope for the best?" And that's what we managed to do. So we snuck a 54-minute fan film out there, which cheats the guidelines just a little bit. But and there's a few more things out there. So as long as filmmakers kind of stay within those, I don't know that CBS Paramount's going to have a huge problem with it. My personal opinion is just, watch the money. You can't be paying anybody. It's got to be a volunteer effort. You can't actually, they have a guideline that you can't hire anyone who's ever worked in a Star Trek production, either as an actor or crew. You can't bring them onto your crew or your cast, which I think is fair as well. And of course, we all know is, as filmmakers, I mean, they're not the evil bad guy. They are just protecting their property, right? So we get that as filmmakers, and we're just actually grateful and thankful that they still do tolerate fan films and allow, kind of those voices to be heard. And at the end of the day, it's all for love of Star Trek. That's why we're doing it. And I'm of the opinion fan films actually help the franchise, right? Because it's a force multiplier for them. More people are talking about Star Trek, movie era, Wrath of Khan, just with us. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of adds, that could be to CBS and Paramount's advantage in my opinion. So.
I think so. Totally. I mean, how do you get all these volunteers to commit? I mean, are they all family members?
Slave labor. Yeah. Slave labor.
Star Trek, man. Come on.
Yeah. It used to be pizza, like it's like, asking for help to move or something. You could usually buy any labor with a box of pizza, but no, these guys, again, they've been around. Farragut Films, they've been around doing this stuff 20 years. So they actually kind of came with their own cadre of, set guy, and the sets, obviously, if you've seen the movie, like I can talk about the set guys all day. I mean, they did
That's
some work.
excellent.
Oh, they did some work. Yeah.
Yeah, even the Klingon setup, I was like, oh, okay, I'm impressed with that. That was
Yeah.
really cool. I mean, is there any other kind of IP out there that has such a loyal fan base to pull this off? I mean, because it's a really good, piece. I just never seen so many people come together like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's plenty of Star Wars, fan films out there. I found when we made The Oath, I found there's a ton of Batman fan films. Warner Brothers kind of has their own tolerances for what folks can do with Batman and DC characters, I guess. But yeah, with the Trek stuff, we had just a family of volunteers that came out from all walks of life. Right, we needed people who knew computers and projections and HDMI to run all those consoles. We needed carpenters to hammer and nail sets together. We needed artists to come in and do the production design. I mean, we're just a scaled down version of Hollywood, right? Like we have the same challenges, the same problems, and we have to do the same things just on a much smaller scale. But we were just kind of able to inherit a lot of the Farragut Films family who've done this stuff for years, kind of repurpose them toward movie era and try to have some fun with it along the way. So.
Yeah, I'm going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, Johnny, but I would say, Michael, we've experienced so many people in the Star Trek family over the years who've just been willing to chip in and help out and just be part of the conversation and be part of the family and just add to the amazing franchise that we all love so much, right? I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of the people, if not everybody, who works on these fan films are huge, gigantic Star Trek fans and just want to be a piece of it, right? Whether they're getting paid by pizza or paid by something else, they're being a part of it and they're making something cool, and then get to see it go up on YouTube or whatever, and you get to see the success from there, right?
Yeah. And my question to you, Johnny, do you if you have like a Farragut Forward screening? I know you had a screening when you launched it, but have you heard about anybody doing that, like having their own screening parties for it?
Small scale, it's living rooms, right? We got to watch out. We don't want to do anything theatrically where now someone's making a profit from a theatrical screening. That's a whole nother can of worms too. We had a private screening for our cast and crew when we did the premiere, and that was on the big screen. I knew that would be the first and only time anyone would ever see Farragut Forward on the big screen. It's going to be, unfortunately, when you look at stats, the majority of people who watch fan films watch them on their phone, which hurts me a lot. It's like, at least watch it on the TV. But but the other thing I wanted to say real quick is just a shout out to our Indiegogo backers. We crowdfunded it. I mentioned before, Paramount limits fan films to $50,000. We waited until we got to about 46,000, just so there were no shenanigans, and we shut it down at about 46K. The 46K, that didn't magically come out of nowhere. That was dedicated Star Trek fans as well, not necessarily on our crew, building sets or costumes, but that's just Star Trek fans all over the world saying, hey, I'll give you $10, $50 or more just to see my name in the credits and to help the cause. So just a big thanks to the Indiegogo backers too.
That's so brilliant. Brilliant. Now, some people may be wondering, well, why did we bring Johnny onto our show? I mean, besides the fact that, we support the fan. Well, you dropped something huge in that. For us, it was kind of huge. And you dropped in the Shackleton Expanse. I just jumped off my seat when I heard that. Talk to us about that, Johnny. Where'd that come from? Why'd you do it?
Yeah, I had to. Well, just backing way up. Like, I love, Star Trek Adventures. I got into, actually, Star Trek Adventures was not only the first role-playing game I ever game mastered, it was the first role-playing game I ever played in my life. Okay. So, wow. And I got into STA. When did it come out? Did it come out 17, something like that?
Yeah, 17.
So that's about when I found it, because I was thirsty for a new Star Trek game. I had a few friends who had actually never played RPGs either, right? So we all came into this. It's not like we just ported over our D&D, crew. We didn't have a D&D crew. We were just Star Trek fans. It's like, hey, do you think we can figure out this rule set? Can we figure it out? And to Jim's credit and the folks at Modifius, we did. We didn't have to come with, 20 years of knowledge of FASA or D&D to figure it out. We could just pick up the STA quick book and just kind of run with it. So I started GMing that back in the day, ended up GMing two different groups who play occasionally, but what's cool about it is they play in the same timeline. So the actions of one group's mission will directly impact the other group. So, we do things like if this group has to, go do surveillance on a Romulan prison and pull back as much intel as they can, whatever they're able to pull back is going to get fed to the other team for the other group, for better or for worse. And if they get nothing, they get nothing. If they get all
deep.
Yeah. So in some of these games, I'm getting text messages from the other group saying, how are they doing? Are they getting everything? Because we need this for our game. So it's fun as a GM to to kind of puppet master that. It adds a new level. But yeah, so long story short, I love STA. I've played it for years. When the Farragut Forward script came to me, I guess a couple years ago, it was originally written by John Broughton and Paul Sieber. And then I took a look at it and kind of did my polish on it, made it more of a shooting script. And when I read their script, they had a very desolate, scary region of space. And in the script, it was called the Kalahari region. And the Kalahari, obviously named after the desert. And the Kalahari region was this scary place that no one was supposed to go to. And there was weird things going on there. And as soon as I read that, I said, yeah, we're not going to call that the Kalahari region. We're going to call that the Shackleton Expanse. And if you know, because it kind of suited all of our needs. So that's why as soon as I said that, as soon as I saw that, I just kind of highlighted that in the script and said, yeah, we're going to call it this from now on. And then on the visual effects side, that kind of gave us some fun ways to play with, okay, what color is it, right? What does it look like? And that type of stuff. But yeah, that's where the Shackleton Expanse came from, is my love for the game.
Yeah, Jim, how do you feel about it starting to trickle into these other media sources? Because it also trickled somewhere else too, didn't it, Jim?
No, not yet. I mean, we've been trying. It just hasn't quite gotten there yet. But no, it's great to see it anywhere. It's great to see people using it, right? I mean, I know that book was a huge labor of love, and we've been working on it, with the Living campaign back in 2017, even 2016, 2017. We were starting up the Living campaign, and then we were able to morph that into the big book, right? And I know everybody that worked on it, Dayton and Scott and Kelly and Derek and I and all the other writers as well. I mean, I can't speak for them, but for me personally, I'm just excited that anyone's using it, right? I'm always excited when I read articles online or whatever, and people are like, "Oh yeah, we're working through the Shackleton Expanse, where our crew's in the original series era, and we're going to do a generational game up into the next gen era, or we decided to rewrite it all for next gen, or we decided to rewrite it all for something else." So I'm just excited that the stuff we worked on years and years ago is still being used, and everybody invariably is putting their own fresh spin on it, which is exactly what you want, right? I mean, I think that's what Gene wanted for Star Trek way back in the day. He built this universe for us, and thousands of people are doing new things with it. And it just shows you how far you can expand it. So it's great. I love it. More, please, more.
and while you're here, just tell us a little bit, Johnny, about the game you play with you talked about this two different crews playing. What era is it? What's going on? I'm curious. Yeah, what's the ship? What are the ships named?
So because we never played an RPG, right? Our quickest way to success was just to play the pre-gen characters and the pre-gen ship, right? And it just grew organically from that. So the first group on the Magellan, a Galaxy class ship, pre-gen. Excuse me. The one of our players is, I think, T'Prel. Is that the name, right? So the nurse from the pre-gen, and then one of the others is the security chief, the Andorian, and Zarath, right? And they just took those characters and kind of ran with them. We decided to have Captain Elizabeth Shelby as the captain of the Magellan, so she was our captain. Dr. Pulaski was the chief medical officer on the Magellan in our world for a while, and that just kind of became its own thing. Just as a GM, I learned kind of quickly that, man, a Galaxy class, you have unlimited resources. Like there's nothing that ship can't do, really.
Right.
And there's also 1,100 people on it, right? So I didn't really know that until I started the second group with a different group of friends in a different state, and they said, no, we want to have an Intrepid class, and it's going to be called the USS Resolute. And now we're talking about 150 people. It's a much smaller crew. And then as a GM, I'm always trying to get them off that ship as much as possible. Let's let's start the mission in media. What was it? I forget the phrase.
In media res.
In media res. That was my first my instinct. I like to start them just in a runabout, spiraling out of control, crashing through orbit. So that way they don't have unlimited resources of an intrepid class. But that's just my thing. But
I love that.
Yeah, era wise, I think we ended up landing. We're about season 7 of TNG. Is about where we are. There's enough interesting things going on in the TNG world. Voyager hasn't been lost yet. Dominion War is not quite there yet. So it's kind of, right on the cusp of a lot of things happening. And that was just kind of the everyone's favorite era. So,
yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how happy I feel that a filmmaker is that into STA. I mean, you've been playing that now. Sounds you've been playing almost 7-8 years now, your crew?
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah. And I wish we played, full disclosure, I wish we played more than we did, but making the film, that took some time, so sometimes you have to, sometimes life gets in the way of gaming, but yeah, I wish we could play a little more than we currently do. But now that Farragut's over, I find myself with more free time than I had a couple months ago. So we're going to get back to it pretty quick.
And how do you feel playing RPG fuels your storytelling into film?
That's a really good question, actually. I think it probably helps me, especially as a GM, it helps me think a little more structurally. Like I can kind of take the heart and the emotion out of what I think the story is and almost look at it like, okay, at 20, and this is a over-engineered way of doing it, but it's how my brain works. Okay, at 20% of the way through the story structurally, where does it need to be to make it awesome? At 50%, where does it need to be? At 80%, I know something has to happen. Don't know what it is yet, but I know that it will, right? And then what does that last little bit look like that's going to dovetail us right into whatever the sequel is, what's coming next, right? So for me, it kind of helps me break it into, it makes me see the story a little more, I guess, scientifically and rigidly, because in any story, whether it's the Odyssey or Pet Sematary or whatever, things are going to happen at these key milestones, right? And that's the same with film. It's the same with RPGs. It's the same with any good story. So it kind of helps me structure things out a little more, as opposed to how I used to write stories, which is just, let's just write and see what happens, which is cool too. And sometimes it's good to do that, but I like to be a little more disciplined and rigid with it, if that makes sense. So.
Totally. I know Jim wants to talk about RPG as literature. Go.
I don't know. I was just listening to Johnny, and I was thinking, gosh, you could look at the entirety of a story as an extended task, right? And as you're working through it, you're getting to your breakthroughs or your milestones, and you're chipping them off one by one. If you want that kind of structure to it, right? Where like I like to have an outline when I write, and I don't write a very detailed outline. It's really kind of a thin outline because I need to see the milestones, like the mile markers. Like I know I have to get from point A to B. It doesn't matter how I get there. I'm still going to get there, but cool things can happen. And then more cool things can happen to point C and then point D and so on and so forth. But, I try to write it into the dark as well, just, to free write and to see where I go. And invariably I end up, doing that for a while, and then I'm staring at the wall and I'm wandering off into deep thought or something. It's like, I don't know where I'm going with this. And invariably I feel like I'm a stronger writer when I actually know where I'm going and I know where the points are. So I do appreciate the discipline. But it struck me when I was listening to you, like, oh yeah, writing a story is like an extended task. You're just piecing through it.
How do you think, Johnny, RPG has helped you understand characters and character voices better?
Oh man, good questions here. RPG and characters. I mean, RPG players are going to do the exact opposite of what you think they're going to do, right? So I guess the answer there is don't be afraid to have about 7 contingency plans, right? Because they're going to go off the rail. They're going to it shouldn't be on rails to begin with, but if it's on rails, they're going to go off the rails. But I don't know, man. That's a tough question. I guess keep an open mind, for the unexpected. Just because a character is a certain archetype doesn't mean they always have to do things that archetype would do. Leave the door open for them to come out of nowhere and do something you don't expect. I guess maybe that's I'm kind of making that up as I go a little bit, but I guess that's about the best fit I can think, is just, let the characters breathe. Don't let them get stuck in an archetype. They're going to do what they want. And especially if they're an RPG player, they're going to do exactly the one thing you didn't expect them to do. And you got to rewrite everything on the fly. So
yeah, well, that's why I asked that, because when we've had comic writers on the show, Jackson Lance and Colin Kelly, who writes Star Trek comics, they've come on the show to talk about it. Of course, the whole cavalcade of RPG writers, Dayton Ward, novelist, Scott Pearson, novelist, Derek Tyler Addick. We've all these people come on the show talking about RPG as literature and how it informs watching their players play for all these years, how it informs that when they're writing, that they don't cubbyhole even the characters that they're writing in the film or into the stories and stuff like that. Like you said, wide open. So I just like asking that question, because I tend to think of RPG as improv class.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so just wondering how that affects you, maybe when you're directing or creating or writing a screenplay.
Yeah, yeah, and luckily, like there wasn't a ton of ad lib on Farragut Forward. Once we had the script locked, and also just a different side of this, some of those sets that we were shooting on, those were not standing sets. So that bridge set that we shot on was standing for about 96 hours. Okay, so that was it. So as the director and a cinematographer, you'd better be organized, and you better know what you need, and you better get it all, because that set's not going to be there, the day after, right? So
can you tell us more about that? I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Yeah. No, of course. So a lot of I picture a lot of the 60s era Star Trek fan films. So that's the TOS bridge. Those were standing sets. So that was a warehouse. I think it's in Georgia. And I think there's one in New York now. I'm not the guy to talk about all that, but these were all standing sets with standing lighting grids ready to go. Anyone could show up, shoot a Star Trek fan production on that TOS bridge. It's lit up, ready to go. Ours, because we jumped into the Wrath of Khan era, which is an era that no one has really ever played in the fan film world, for a lot of reasons. The Monster Maroon uniforms are outrageously expensive, extremely complex, a lot of work. We actually ended up making more Monster Maroon uniforms for Farragut Forward than what they made for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, which is ridiculous.
Wow.
Okay. It's ridiculous. There were no standing sets. So all those sets had to be built from scratch. There wasn't a single frame of green screen in all of Farragut Forward. Every single thing you saw was a practical set. It was real. It existed, right? It was plywood, with the exception of engineering. There's a quick shot of engineering that was not plywood. Those sets were built in a warehouse that a business owner had very graciously loaned us. The catch was they couldn't stand up forever. They could stand up for a long weekend, and we shot this several weekends over 2 years. But those sets, in many cases, would only be there for 2, 3, 4 days. Typically, we'd film over a holiday weekend just to get the extra day off for folks, and then the set was going to get torn down and placed into storage until it's needed again somewhere later. So that's the pressure I was under. We didn't have a standing set that we could just come out and this was all coming from us talking about ad lib and let's kind of see where it goes. No, it was like, we have a shot list and we got to get everything on the shot list. And by the way, we're probably going to be here till 2 a.m. doing it, working 16, 17-hour days, which is not atypical for film. Our folks don't get paid for it. That's atypical and unfortunate. But a lot of pressure to get what we needed in the time that we needed, just because those sets we didn't have a lot of time on those sets.
So I'm curious, you had to tear it down and store it away. Like, do you still have all those assets stored away somewhere safely so that you can make use of them again?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's been a lot of talk about, and again, the same guys, a lot of the same guys that built these sets were the same ones that built all those TOS sets for the original Starship Farragut stuff, which went on to be used by Star Trek Continues and some of the other fan film groups. There's been a lot of discussion along the way about what's the smartest way to leverage those sets in the future, even if it's for other productions, other filmmakers, looking for a space to maybe keep those set up. There's been plenty of talk about this would just be a cool museum. That's just something, if you can find a cheap space, set it up. I mean, if you build it, they will come, right? And who wouldn't go want to have their picture taken on a Wrath of Khan era or Undiscovered Country era bridge, right? There was a lot of talk about kind of what the future of those sets are going to be. But yeah, to answer your question, Jim, nothing got destroyed. They just don't stand up 24/7, but they're all stored away in places we can get to. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess I'm curious, just listening to you, like as a project manager, I have to wear a lot of different hats any given day, working on different products, doing either writing, editing, proofreading, art direction, art management, logistics, invoices, blah 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 blah. So I'm just curious, like in your role with your company, and then just being involved in these projects, like on average for this production, how many different hats would you say you wore working through this one? And of all those different hats that you had to wear, which one's your favorite?
Yeah, the biggest hats I wore, and there's actually advantages to kind of doing all these yourself because you can kind of cut out a lot of the work, the middle work. The biggest hats I wore was director, cinematographer, and editor. So, and I was a co-writer. So it was very helpful to co-write the script because when I'm helping co-write the script 2 years ago, I'm already seeing it in my head. I know how it's going to be cut together, right? So I was able to kind of to co-write it. And then when I shot it, I didn't need a lot of superfluous stuff because I could already see the movie in my head. I'm not a great storyboarder, but I can sketch out, what I need. I don't need to shoot, a bunch of wides, a bunch of mediums, and a bunch of close-ups when I know I'm only going to use the close-up. So it saves us time that way, right? So there's some efficiency to co-writing, shooting it yourself, directing it yourself, and then it was me who edited it at the end of that. And it actually made things pretty efficient to work like that. If I had to give any of those up, man, I would probably hand the camera over to somebody I trust. And then that will allow me to kind of stay as the director. I don't think I could ever give up the editing. I love editing. There's a catchphrase in film, which is there's the movie you write, there's the movie you shoot, and there's the movie you edit. And those can be three very different films. And edits can make or break a movie, as you guys know, on any level. And once I kind of got into filmmaking and I understood the true power of editing, and if you don't believe me, go to YouTube and watch somebody who's cut together the trailer for When Harry Met Sally to make it look like a horror film. Like you can do some sick stuff with editing, right? And I don't know that I can give that one up because there's so much storytelling power in editing just to make those sweet moments last a little longer or make the pacing go quicker. Like you can do that with ones and zeros, and it's a little easier to do that in a no pressure environment sitting at your computer at night than it is when you're on set worrying about the logistics and the food and who's coming here and who's got a peanut allergy and what happens if we catch the building on fire and who's got the band-aids. Like, all that stuff's going crazy on sets, right? So sometimes you can have a little more leeway to make those story decisions in the edit.
So I'm curious, like, I'm not a filmmaker. Everything I've learned, I've watched by watching, the bonus features on countless DVDs and Blu-rays and stuff, and just absorbing it that way, right? But I know, like, a lot of movies, they get multiple takes, right? They get multiple takes, they get multiple angles, they get multiple shots of the actor giving the director 5, 6, 7, 10 different versions of a line or something, and then the editor and the director can sit there and go, oh, well, this one has this nuance and this one has that nuance. Like, because you had such a tight schedule and you only had so much time to work on these sets and with these actors, like how much coverage do you have to pick from as an editor? Like, do you have a few options, or are you really kind of limited with a handful and you just got to kind of make it work? I'm just curious about how that process works for you.
Yeah, it's the answer. It's different per shoot. Some of those shoots, because we did a whole weekend just on the Klingon bridge. We did a whole weekend just on the Federation bridges. Did a whole weekend in the Klingon jail and the Klingon lab, and then we did the whole last third of the movie night exteriors outside in a field. That last part was when we were really down to the gun. And Jim, some of those just to make our day, because that night exterior field was about, I'd say 150 miles that we had to bring in everybody, hotels, all this stuff. You don't want to have to go back there. Like, you can't, if you don't make it, we shot there 2 nights in a row. We had about 50 extras. I mean, altogether, we probably had almost 100 people out there, including crew and extras. You got to feed all those people. You got to keep them safe. Porta potties. You don't want to do that again. So when I'm looking at my first AD at midnight and I'm saying, oh, by the way, all these people are in makeup, and it's whenever we stop cameras, there's still another 3 hours after that the makeup crew are going to have to stay there to get all that Klingon stuff off their head. Just because we say that's a wrap for the night, now we're 3 hours away from pulling out of here. And I'm always worried about safety. I don't want people driving home or driving anywhere at 5 a.m. after a 17-hour day. I mean, that's bad news, right? And just because we're indie film, you can't take shortcuts with safety. We don't do that either, right? So Jim, I guess to answer your question, like that last weekend shooting those night exteriors, we were down to, especially late at night, we were down to 2 takes. I was going to shoot 2 takes of something, and then I had enough confidence in my ability to cheat with the edit. You know, if they don't get one line quite right or one word quite right, don't worry, I can cut away to something else. I'll figure it out. But what I couldn't do is do what you just said and say, well, let's do take 6. Maybe take 8 will be better than take 7. We didn't have that luxury at the end. We had a little more earlier in the movie. It was a little more relaxed, but by the end, yeah, some of those things were 2 takes easy.
What was brilliant about the scene, though, is everyone was tired and beat up anyway, so it kind of worked.
You should have seen the people behind the camera.
Oh, really? Okay, and I do have to ask one question about that scene, because one of my favorite, well, no, I'm not going to say because I know you didn't have license to use it. One of my favorite characters, or her sister, showed up, Martia, who's one of my favorite characters from Undiscovered Country. The actor you found to look so close to her. Talk to me about this.
Oh my goodness. So that's actually a super talented lady named Tanya Broughton. She's a runway model, awesome person. She is our executive producer's wife. So our executive producer is John Broughton. He also plays Captain Carter in the film and has been doing this for 20 years. That's his wife, Tanya. And he actually surprised me with that way early on. And I guess we were in production. She was never in the script, right? And our story is set right around Star Trek V, something like that. We didn't want to go full Wrath of Khan because there's a lot of differences between Wrath of Khan and Undiscovered Country. You know, we wanted the acoudigrams and the that kind of look for it. So Martia for our movie made sense. The timeline was right, and he just sent me a picture of her done up with the makeup, the costume, the eyes, and is like, "What do you think?"
It
and
was
I'm like,
amazing.
And I'm like, what other surprises do you have over there you're not telling me about? I said, now that I've seen that, like, she's going in the movie. It's just going to be a cameo, a quick thing. She's a former prisoner in a group of prisoners. No surprise that she ends up in yet a different prison later in her life. But yeah, he sent me that. I said, well, that's got to go in the movie. Yeah. And her, the person who ended up doing her makeup is a guy named Derek Rutledge, who is a super talented guy. He's actually Oprah's makeup artist.
Wow. So, that's so cool.
we had some high profile makeup work on Farragut Forward, and Iman, actually, who played Martia.
Yeah.
In Undiscovered Country, Iman got a hold of one of the photos. She saw it on Instagram and gave the official Iman thumbs
what?
up. Yeah.
Oh, that's so deep.
We got that photo out there, and the real Iman nailed it. So
world. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That made it so it was a scream out loud moment for me. I was like, Martia.
That was the intent. No, that was the intent. Glad it worked.
And it did. I have to say, it ruined about 3 minutes afterwards because my mind, I riff all the time. And so I immediately was trying to place, like, how did she get there? And what's the story? And wait, is this before? I was doing that. So I did have to, I probably should go rewind and go watch after that scene because you got me on that one. Good. That's deep, man. I'm really so appreciative of the work. Now I have to go back and watch it with a whole nother level of appreciation. I have to commend you two on something. I don't know if you ever listen to Delta Flyers. It's a podcast with, so Delta Flyers, they talk a lot about what the directors do, and you shoot in very much the same style as Star Trek. Other directors like David Livingston and Croker, like, they're like, no, like, you have to say the line exactly like this because they already have everything scripted and they only get 8 days to make these episodes. So I really, maybe one day you'll get called in to direct a real episode. You never know, Johnny.
Maybe, you never know. Yeah. It just comes down to efficiency. I don't like having my time wasted, and the last thing I want to do is waste other people's time. And again, some of these crews, I mean, this for Farragut Forward, this is not 7 or 8 people with a camcorder. I mean, some of these shooting days, this is 50, 75, 100 people, who are standing. I mean, it's game day. You have to come into that prepared and just be as efficient as possible. So I think that's where my preparedness comes from. And Jim, in my real life, I'm also a project manager, so I get the Gantt charts and everything else I need to do to kind of lay out what I need, and I kind of bring some of that to filmmaking, because I mean, you have to be prepared. I don't want to be showing up and just winging it and hoping that we can save it in the edit. Like, I want to show up knowing this is what we need to get before lunch. Then we're going to give people a break. This is what we're going to get right after that. And then right after that, everyone's going to be really tired and want to go home. So maybe we do the easy stuff about right there. And I want to start with something easy in the morning, gets us moving, gets us, everybody in a good mood. So you just got to think about all that stuff.
Yeah, well, what you're doing also is you're putting something together that a lot of people could be proud of on their resumes, like when they're on creative or anything. They go, okay, I did this fan film production, and some people, I mean, I was surprised. I'm like, wow, I can consistently do. I'm like, how do they afford to do this? How are they doing this? Because it's good. It's good. I'd watch it on TV. So I think what you're doing is great for all the creatives too, and I hope they are pointing people to brag about it, put on the resumes.
Yeah, thanks. No, super talented group of folks that came together, and even the musicians, the composers, like all that stuff as well. I mean, just the makeup artists, all those prosthetics, like all that stuff requires a certain talent, and it's not like just anybody can do that. So we were super lucky to have all the crew and folks that we had to bring all that together.
Good. So we got to ask, what's next?
I'm looking forward to getting back into my original stories, just stuff that have been ideas that have been kicking around in my head for a long time. Usually they exist at least as an outline somewhere, usually as a note file on my phone, is how all these outlines start. I'm looking forward to getting back into original ideas. And somebody asked me the other day, they're like, how are you going to go bigger than Farragut? Because the movie we did before Farragut was the Batman fan film, which was pretty big. Farragut was about 5 times the size of that, and it was intense, and it took 2 years to make. And somebody asked us, what are you going to do next? It's even bigger than that. I said, there's no desire to like keep getting bigger and bigger. I said, if I can tell a small story with 2 people sitting in a car, I'm okay going the other way. Like, let's go tell a quiet story. Something. It doesn't have to be a special effects extravaganza with 75 extras. Like, I have a craving to kind of go back and tell some of the smaller stories that are kicking around in my head. So yeah, I'm a big horror movie fan. I've got an idea for a horror movie. I think we're going to end up shooting in the spring, maybe, and might try to get it out for Halloween next year. Is my thought. So.
All right. Well, let us know how people can find you. Where should they go to get in contact with you to watch all of your films?
Yeah, of course. Check out Chaotica Studios, Kaotica. Catch us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. You can find what we're up to there. And also, besides Farragut Forward being up there, I love, like Jim was saying, all those behind the scenes documentaries for all the movies we love, all those DVD extras. Like, I am a sucker for those. So when we started making all our movies, I didn't want to just put the movie out. I'm like, no, indie filmmakers, if we can inspire other filmmakers to figure out how to do this themselves, it's like, let's put out a flood of behind the scenes stuff. So there is so much behind the scenes documentaries on Farragut Forward. You can find that on our YouTube channel. Gets into the costumes, gets into the makeup, gets into the sets. All that stuff's out there. The same with our other movies. I love that type of stuff. But yeah, you can find us on all social media, and also www.chaoticastudios.com.
The fact that you do this for a hobby.
Yeah, the IRS tells me it's not a hobby, so I should probably listen.
Oh yeah, it's not a hobby. You're right. It's not a. But the fact that this is a passion project to this level is just really astonishing, right, Jim?
No, it's awesome. I love creativity, and at the top of the show, you said that. What did you say, Johnny? You said that you felt like you kind of got into it late in life. Right. And my first thought was it reminded me of all the writers out there that I've been talking to over the years and mentoring sometimes. And they say, oh, I'm 62 years old. Is it too late to write? It's like, no, it's never too late. You get started, be passionate and get into it and do what you love. And you're doing what you love. And that's inspiring all on its own, whether you started it as a teenager student or you're a little later in life, that whatever you started it, you did something and you're building it and you're making amazing stuff. And that should be an inspiration for anybody to look at your stuff, look at the behind the scenes stuff and keep on with it. So no, I just love it. It's another one of the many great stories, not just for Star Trek, but just, creatives doing cool stuff. So really appreciate the encouragement and the inspiration that you and your entire crew have brought to life. So thank you.
Hey, no, thank you. Awesome.
Fantastic. All right. Well, let's get our gratitude going. I'll go first and then we'll pass over to Johnny and close with Jim. My gratitude is, again, Johnny, to you. I think you're representative of a lot of our fans. You have that huge list of Indiegogo people that people, I think, go ahead and when the film ends, take your time and everybody watch those names because that's who you have to thank for this. Jim does the same thing. If anyone notices in the back of this latest Star Trek Adventures 2E release, he thanks everybody he can fit with what 7-point type in there. And so I think it's important for us to understand that Star Trek is a community. And I think, Johnny, you've etched another huge wedge of the pie of keeping it alive for us. Especially there was a long time with a drought of actual Star Trek stuff out on TV, and it's, again, fans like you that keep the IP alive, fresh, and me hooked for 30 something years. All right, Johnny, on to you. Any gratitude?
Yeah, just I want to thank like Star Trek fans, like just Star Trek fans in general, and I saw so many of them just come out of the woodwork to help us get a little fan film project off the ground. They believed in it. And also, by the way, they were very patient because it took us 2 years to shoot Farragut Forward. And fans have a certain level of patience because they know it takes a long time to do this stuff. We live in a world now of instant gratification, right? If I'm contributing to something right now on Indiegogo, I need to see a result of it, 4 weeks from now. Well, it's going to be 2 years, so I guess my gratitude is just like to the fans, all those Indiegogo supporters that I mentioned before. For Farragut, definitely our very talented cast, our crew, and then also, more importantly, I think, are their families, because all their families lost their significant other almost every weekend for off and on for 2 years because they were helping build sick bay or they were helping build, a quarters or a corridor. So, I mean, just everyone who put their energy into Farragut Forward, that's kind of who I'm feeling the gratitude for right now. And also you two gentlemen for having me on to be able to talk about this stuff. So
anytime, Jim.
Anytime. Now, yeah, my gratitude is also to Johnny and to your crew and to your cast and everybody involved in making the films, and also all the filmmakers out there making fan films and just carrying the Star Trek flag forward to another generation and just to another another media. Right, another media type. Like we've got, Star Trek fans started off writing fan fiction way back in the day, back in the '60s, right? And it's just carried on from there. It's always been the fans carrying the franchise, even through the lean years when there was no TV show, no movies, no nothing, and it just kept it alive. And this is just another way of keeping it alive. You're doing it on a different level, different scale. I mean, everything's got a different scale, right? But you're doing amazing stuff, and it just keeps that Star Trek tapestry going a little further. So, and yeah, you're right. Star Trek fans are super patient. 2 years is a long time to wait, and I just think I've honestly lost track, Michael. I don't know if you backed it or not, but the Voyager documentary that's supposed to be coming out here one of these days, that thing was funded.
I know, almost 2 years ago. Well, it started.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, because I'm one of the producers on that one.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, and it's just starting to. I think it's been a long time. About to have the premiere. Yeah.
So 2 years. I mean, that's just a testament to the fans and how much they love it and how invested they are in your work. So I can't wait to see what you do next, whether it's Star Trek or original stuff. I'm always a fan of original stuff because I think a lot of us got our start working on the IPs that we love and then branching off into original stuff and then sometimes coming back to it, of course. But just very grateful for everything you're doing and grateful to the Star Trek fans, as always. We can't do any of this without you. If we didn't have the fans, then we wouldn't. Well, we'd probably still be doing it, but we'd have a very tiny audience. Right? So
awesome.
Johnny, thank you for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Really
Absolutely. Do. Thank you, guys. It was fun.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right. The conversation continues, everyone. IDIC.
Live long and prosper. Be safe, be well. We'll talk to you all next time.